In the past, all conceivable evils were heaped upon the heads of the poor. And if it wasn't terrible work and living conditions, they also had to suffer bad food and drink, for they were often supplied tainted and indigestible fare, passed off as fit to eat. If the food was bad, the adulteration of it made it worse still, and only served to weaken health and the ability of the impoverished to escape the clutches of disease. The poor couldn't afford to inquire too closely into the quality of their purchases, and to them fell the adulterated, sometimes poisoned provisions. They had to deal with the small retailers that couldn't sell even the same quality of goods so cheaply as the largest retailers. And because of their small capital, credit and proportional expenses of their business, knowingly or unknowingly bought adulterated goods in order to sell at lower prices and to meet the competition of others. A large retailer who had extensive capital invested in his business had his credit ruined if detected in a fraudulent practice. But to a small grocer, who had customers in a single street only, and frauds were proved against him, what then? If no one trusted him at one corner, he simply moved to another. Victorian street vendors were numerous. All sorts of edibles, from baked potatoes to cakes and puddings, could be bought and eaten on the busy streets of Britain's towns and cities. The same with drinks, and the ginger beer cellar was a common sight. But the staple of the streets was the coffee stall, and in the mid-19th century, it was a much more popular beverage than tea or cocoa. Competition for trade and the best street corners for customers, however, was fierce, and competition and greed often went hand in hand. Coffee drinkers couldn't escape the hucksters who bought up inferior provisions to cheat customers with inferior ingredients. Today, you will discover, in an account by Henry Mayhew, a Victorian journalist writing in the early 1850s, how coffee was sold and consumed on the streets of Victorian London. Find out how crooked vendors adulterated their drink for sale to unsuspecting customers, what it was like to visit a coffee stall, and who you might meet after dark, and learn what life was like for a working-class coffee vendor, trying to make an honest, and sometimes dishonest, crust. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us continue bringing the past alive. The vending of tea and coffee in the streets was little if at all known 20 years ago, 1831. Salop being then the beverage supplied from stalls to the late and early wayfarers. Salop was a popular drink in the 18th and 19th centuries, initially made with flour derived from tubers of orchids. It was a cheap and popular alternative for travellers to coffee, which was expensive at that time. Coffee stalls gradually replaced salop stalls. Nor was it until after 1842 that the stalls approached to anything like their present number, which is said to be upwards of 300, the majority of the proprietors being women. Prior to 1824, coffee was in little demand, even among the smaller tradesmen or farmers, but in that year the duty having been reduced from 1 shilling to 6p per pound. The consumption throughout the kingdom in the next 7 years was nearly trebled, the increase being from nearly £8 million in 1824 to nearly £23 million in 1831. In 1842, the duty on coffee was fixed at 4p from British possessions, and from foreign countries at 6p. But it was not owing solely to the reduced price of coffee that the street vendors of it increased in the year or two subsequent to 1842, at least 100%. The great facilities then offered for a cheap adulteration by mixing ground chicory with the ground coffee was an enhancement of the profits and a greater temptation to embark in the business, as a smaller amount of capital would suffice. Within these 2 or 3 years, this cheapness has been still further promoted by the medium of adulteration, the chicory itself being, in its turn, adulterated by the admixture of baked carrots, saccharine, roots, and the like, an archaic word for sugar, which of course are not subjected to any duty, while foreign chicory is charged 6 pence per pound. English chicory is not chargeable with duty and is now cultivated, I am assured, to the yield of between 4,000 and 5,000 tons yearly, and this nearly all used in the adulteration of coffee. Nor is there greater culpability in this trade among street vendors than among respectable shopkeepers, for I was assured by a leading grocer that he could not mention 20 shops in the city of which he could say, "You can go and buy a pound of ground coffee there, and it will not be adulterated." The revelations recently made on this subject by the Lancet are a still more convincing proof of the general dishonesty of grocers. The coffee stall keepers generally stand at the corner of a street. In the fruit and meat markets there are usually 2 or 3 coffee stalls, and 1 or 2 in the streets leading to them. In Covent Garden there are no less than 4 coffee stalls. Indeed, the stalls abound in all the great thoroughfares, and the most in those not accounted fashionable and great business routes, but such as are frequented by working people on their way to their day's labour. The best pitch in London is supposed to be at the corner of Duke Street, Oxford Street. The proprietor of that stall is said to take full 30 shillings of a morning in halfpence. One stall keeper, I was informed, when upon the drink, thinks nothing of spending his 10 or 15 pounds in a week. A party assured me that once, when the stall keeper mentioned was away, on the spree, he took up his stand there, and got from 4 to 5 shillings in the course of 10 minutes, at the busy time of the morning. The coffee stall usually consists of a spring barrow, with 2, and occasionally 4 wheels. Some are made up of tables, and some have a trestle and board. On the top of this are placed 2 or 3, and sometimes 4, large tin cans, holding upon an average 5 gallons each. Beneath each of these cans is a small iron fire-pot, perforated like a rushlight shade, and here charcoal is continually burning, so as to keep the coffee or tea, with which the cans are filled, hot throughout the early part of the morning. The board of the stall has mostly a compartment for bread and butter, cake and ham sandwiches, and another for the coffee mugs. There is generally a small tub under each of the stalls, in which the mugs and saucers are washed. The grandest stall in this line is the one before mentioned, as standing at the corner of Duke Street, Oxford Street. It is a large truck on 4 wheels, and painted a bright green. The cans are 4 in number, and of bright polished tin, mounted with brass plates. There are compartments for bread and butter, sandwiches, and cake. It is lighted by 3 large oil lamps, with bright brass mountings, and covered in with an oilcloth roof. The coffee stalls, generally, are lighted by candle lamps. Some coffee stalls are covered over with tarpaulin, like a tent, and others screened from the sharp night or morning air by a clothes horse covered with blankets, and drawn half round the stall. Some of the stall keepers make their appearance at 12 at night, and some not till 3 or 4 in the morning. Those that come out at midnight are for the accommodation of the night walkers, fast gentlemen and loose girls, and those that come out in the morning are for the accommodation of the working men. It is, I may add, piteous enough to see a few young and good-looking girls, some without the indelible mark of habitual depravity on their countenances, clustering together for warmth round a coffee stall, to which a penny expenditure or the charity of the proprietor has admitted them. The thieves do not resort to the coffee stalls, which are so immediately under the eye of the policeman. The coffee stall keepers usually sell coffee and tea, and some of them cocoa. They keep hot milk in one of the large cans, and coffee, tea, or cocoa in the others. They supply bread and butter, or currant cake, in slices, ham sandwiches, watercresses, and boiled eggs. The price is 1 penny per mug, or halfpenny per half mug for coffee, tea or cocoa, and a halfpenny a slice the bread and butter or cake. The sandwiches are twopence or 1 penny each. The boiled eggs, 1 penny, and the watercresses a halfpenny a bunch. The coffee, tea, cocoa and sugar they generally purchase by the single pound at a grocer's. Those who do an extensive trade purchase in larger quantities. Chicory is mixed with the coffee at the rate of 6 ounces to the pound, and many use as much as 9 and 12 ounces. The coffee is made a dark colour by means of what are called finings, which consist of burnt sugar, such as is used for browning soups. Coffee is the article mostly sold at the stalls. Indeed, there is scarcely one stall in 100 that is supplied with tea, and not more than a dozen in all London that furnish cocoa. The stall keepers usually make the cake themselves. A 4-pound cake generally consists of half a pound of currants, half a pound of sugar, 6 ounces of beef dripping, and a quartern of flour. The ham for sandwiches is usually cut up in slices little thicker than paper. The bread is usually second bread. Some borrow their barrows and pay 1 shilling a week for the hire of them. Many borrow the capital upon which they trade, frequently of their landlord. Some get credit for their grocery, some for their bread. If they borrow, they pay about 20% per week for the loan. I was told of one man that makes a practice of lending money to the coffee stall keepers and other hucksters at the rate of at least 20% a week. If the party wishing to borrow a pound or 2 is unknown to the moneylender, he requires security, and the interest to be paid him weekly. This moneylender, I am informed, has been transported once for receiving stolen property, and would now purchase any amount of plate that might be taken to him. The class of persons usually belonging to the business have been either cabmen, policemen, labourers, or artisans. Many have been bred to dealing in the streets, and brought up to no other employment, but many have taken to the business, owing to the difficulty of obtaining work at their own trade. The generality of them are opposed to one another. I asked one in a small way of business what was the average amount of his profits, and his answer was, "Altogether my clear gains would be 4 shillings 4pence upon an expenditure of 2 shillings 2pence, say 200%. This is said to be about the usual profit of the trade. Sometimes they give credit. One person assured me he trusted as much as 9.5pence that morning, and out of that he was satisfied there was 4pence. At least, he should never see. Most of the stalls are stationary, but some are locomotive. Some cans are carried about with yokes, like milk cans, the mugs being kept in a basket. The best district for the night trade is the city, and the approaches to the bridges. There are more men and women, I was told, walking along Cheapside, Aldersgate Street, Bishopsgate Street, and Fleet Street. In the latter place a good trade is frequently done between 12 at night and 2 in the morning. For the morning trade, the best districts are the Strand, Oxford Street, City Road, New Road, from one end to the other. The markets, especially Covent Garden, Billingsgate, Newgate, and the Borough. There are no coffee stalls in Smithfield. The reason is that the drovers, on arriving at the market, are generally tired and cold, and prefer sitting down to their coffee in a warm shop, rather than drink it in the open street. The best days for coffee stalls are market mornings, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. On these days the receipts are generally half as much again as those of the other mornings. The best time of the year for the business is the summer. This is, I am told, because the work people and costermongers have more money to spend. Some stall keepers save sufficient to take a shop, but these are only such as have a pitch in the best thoroughfares. One who did a little business informed me that he usually cleared, including Sunday, 14 shillings. Last week his gains were 15 shillings. The week before that he could not remember. He is very frequently out all night, and does not earn 6pence. This is on wet and cold nights, when there are few people about. His is generally the night trade. The average weekly earnings of the trade throughout the year are said to be £1. The trade, I am assured by all, is overstocked. They are half too many, they say. 2 of us, to use their own words, are eating one man's bread. When coffee in the streets first came up, a man could go and earn, I am told, his 8 shillings a night at the very lowest. But now the same class of men cannot earn more than 3 shillings. Some men may earn comparatively a large sum, as much as 38 shillings or £2, but the generality of the trade cannot make more than £1 per week, if so much. The following is the statement of one of the class. I was a mason's labourer, a smith's labourer, a plasterer's labourer, or a bricklayer's labourer. I was, indeed, a labouring man. I could not get employment. I was for 6 months without any employment. I did not know which way to support my wife and child. I have only one child. Being so long out of employment, I saw no other means of getting a living but out of the streets. I was almost starving before I took to it. That I certainly was. I'm not ashamed of telling anybody that, because it's true, and I sought for a livelihood wherever I could. Many said they wouldn't do such a thing as keep a coffee stall, but I said I'd do anything to get a bit of bread honestly. Years ago, when I was a boy, I used to go out selling watercresses, and apples, and oranges, and radishes, with a barrow for my landlord. So I thought when I was thrown out of employment, I would take to selling coffee in the streets. I went to a tin man, a maker of tin plate, and paid him 10 shillings 6pence, the last of my savings after I'd been 4 or 5 months out of work, for a can. I didn't care how I got my living so long as I could turn an honest penny. Well, I went on and knocked about and couldn't get a pitch anywhere. But at last I heard that an old man, who had been in the habit of standing for many years at the entrance of one of the markets, had fell ill. So what did I do? But I goes and pops into his pitch, and there I've done better than I've ever did afore. I get 20 shillings now, where I got 10 shillings one time, and if I only had such a thing as £5 or £10, I might get a good living for life. I cannot do half as much as the man that was there before me. He used to make his coffee down there, and had a can for hot water as well. But I have but 1 can to keep coffee and all in, and I have to borrow my barrow, and pay 1 shilling a week for it. If I sell my can out, I can't do any more. The struggle to get a living is so great that, what with one and another in the coffee trade, it's only those who can get good pitches that can get a crust at it.